So let me throw another objection then, and this is another stumbling block, I think. And I think this emerges in postmodernism in particular, because the postmodernists, there's reasons for their manner of thinking. So one reason is, artificial intelligence researchers discovered in the early 1960s that perceiving the landscape was much more difficult than anybody had ever suspected. Originally, it was sort of felt that objects were just there in some simple way, and the complicated computational problem would be how to move among the obvious objects. But it turned out that it's really, really difficult to perceive the environment. There's an infinite or near infinite number of ways that you can perceive even a finite set of objects. So, and that means there's a multitude of potential interpretations for every set of events. And so that was a radical discovery in the computational world, but the same discovery basically occurred at the same time in the world of literary analysis for the same reason, is that every text is susceptible to an inordinately large number of interpretations, and it's not easy to identify the canonical interpretation. And maybe the canonical interpretation isn't canonical, it just serves power, for example. And that would be, religion as the opiate of the masses, or religion as a political tool. And I think that takes things far too far. But there's a real problem here, is that if you divorce the narrative from the objective world, and say, well, the narrative is valuable because it gives us a guide to value, then you have another problem which is, okay, which narrative and how do we make a hierarchy of value among narratives? We would say Hamlet is deeper than Harlequin romance.
Right.
But trying to specify why that is and what deep means is very, very difficult. And you might say, well, the Bible is the deepest of all narratives, but that still begs the question. Well, compared to Buddhist writings, say, compared to the Upanishads, or compared to any long-term complex mythology that's developed over thousands and thousands of years, what makes it canonical? Why is it preferable to Shakespeare, for example? And so, perhaps I could get you to address that, because that's a vicious problem.
There's a lot there. And I'll start with your opening remark about postmodernism, because I quite agree with you. I'm not simply anti-postmodern. In fact, I wrote a book called Toward a Post-Liberal Catholicism, where I took in a lot of the insights of the postmoderns. One of which is, as you quite correctly say, a sort of legitimate perspectivalism, that we never get reality, too cool. Right? Just open my eyes, there's reality. Again, that's Lonergan. It's only a properly constituted subjectivity that opens the door to the properly objective. But one of those ways of properly constituting your subjectivity is to put your subjectivity within a community of discourse. So it's never the case that I simply intuit the way things are and end of the argument. No, it's as Lonergan said, it's not the cogito. That was the trouble with the Enlightenment. It's the cogitamos. It's always we think. And that means I have my perspective, I bounce it off your perspective, you bounce it off somebody else's. We have a disciplined and structured conversation. And in that process, all the different aspects of the real begin to emerge. Or like my intellectual hero, John Henry Newman, said the contents of a real idea is equivalent to the sum total of its possible aspects. That's about 1870, he says that, which is really an extraordinary thing, because he anticipates in many ways the phenomenologists. When they talk about walking around an object and to intuit its essence thereby. And the walking around is not just I walk around, but you're walking around and someone else is walking around. And we're all exchanging our points of view. And again, I'd bring this into line with Catholicism, which has always stressed the communitarian element, that we know precisely in the community of the church. Now, linked to the Bible is never like, just open it up, you're a single subjective viewer, now you take in its meaning. Well, no, we've always said the Bible is read within the church in this long interpretive tradition, where I'm bouncing it off of Augustine's perspective, who got it from Origen, who now throws it to Thomas Aquinas, who now brings it to Newman, and then through preachers and teachers, through the saints. So you've got the technical, intellectual interpretation of the Bible. Then you have the saints, who in many ways, they embody the Bible. So I'm going to read a lot of the biblical stories in light of Francis of Assisi, in light of Teresa of Calcutta, et cetera. So I like that side, if you want, of the postmodern, which is much more attuned to the communal way in which we come to know things. The big question you raise at the end, and we could spend some time with that. How do you make ultimate judgments and determinations like this one is right, you know?
Well, you hinted at it a bit there by saying, well, look, many people have worked on this for a very, very long period of time. And in some sense, it's a living document.
Yeah.
Right? Because it does have to be, the Bible just doesn't exist as a book on a shelf. It's a pattern of meaning within a context, and the context has to be taken into account. So you say, well, there's a powerful context for its interpretation. It's also a fundamental text in that the Bible is implicit in all sorts of other great texts, like Shakespeare, or anything that's a product of Judeo-Christian culture. That's a deep product, is deeply affected by the Bible. So it's there implicitly, whether you like it or not. And so it has to be taken seriously, I would say, even if you don't believe it. But then to the degree that you believe the central axioms of Western culture, you have to wonder how much of what's biblical you do end up believing because of its implicitness.